Hi, it's Rick from 4Community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. It seems to me that every parent has a couple of theme lessons that they like to try to teach their kids or anybody else who's younger that might listen. We generally want our kids to grow up and become healthy adults. So we gather together our ideas and our dreams for our kids and we turn them into some kind of proverb or some kind of sentence or statement that we say over and over again, and our kids like to get annoyed by hearing the same thing all over again. So for me, one of the things I want my kids to carry with them is a healthy understanding of failure. So I sometimes tell them, if you haven't failed this week, you may not have tried hard enough. I want my kids to understand that failure is a part of life, not to fear it, but to embrace it as part of the journey towards success. What about you? We all have these little things. What's one of your theme lessons that you've turned into a simple statement or some kind of proverb that you like to pass along to others because you want them to benefit from the lessons that you have learned? If you're watching with someone, please pause the video and share a life lesson that you often share with others. This video is based on 1 Peter chapter 4 verses 1 through 2. In this passage, a life lesson is being shared with us. This is a life lesson about our experience with suffering. 1 Peter chapter 4 verses 1 through 2. So then, since Christ suffered physical pain, you must arm yourselves with the same attitude he had and be ready to suffer too. For if you have suffered physically for Christ, you have finished with sin. You won't spend the rest of your lives chasing your own desires, but you will be anxious to do the will of God.
Hello, would you like anything else with your croissant?
Yes, coffee, please.
Coming right up. Oh, careful, the coffee's hot.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. But don't forget to watch this week's episode of Connect HQ.
Okay.
Here's what I want to highlight in these two verses. I want us to know when suffering is good. Not all suffering is good. However, some suffering is absolutely awesome. And I've got 2 points to share with you around those moments when suffering is truly good. First, suffering is really good when suffering is a part of great relationships. The text says, since Christ suffered physical pain, you must arm yourselves with the same attitude he had and be ready to suffer too. Parenting in general is awesome, but parenting also has its share of suffering. Parents, can I get some kind of amen or something or thumbs up or something? Parenting isn't suffering, but without suffering, you're not parenting. Being a parent is awesome. It's life enriching. It's a growing experience. You get to be a much bigger person when you become a parent. The enrichment and growth comes through the expense and experience of suffering. Now, wait a minute. There are other words that I can use other than suffering to make this understandable. However, I'm using the word suffering to make a connection with what the text is referring to so we can learn the life lesson that the text is trying to offer us. And here's what the text is saying, this life lesson around suffering. Jesus' attitude around suffering included two things. It included love and included purpose. First, he loves you, and that's never going to change. It's always there. Regardless of what you've done, he still loves you. That's a really big deal. Do you know what God has to put up with all of us to continue to keep on loving us unconditionally? I mean, we make it really hard for God to love us sometimes. In general, people do things that are quite unlovable a lot of the time. But that doesn't change God's mind and doesn't change his heart. He loves you. Second, his purpose is for you and he to be with each other forever. And that's also never going to change. He has a purpose for you. His purpose for you is to fulfill something that he wants for himself. He wants a reciprocal connection with his creation, namely you, for all of eternity. He doesn't want to know you just for a couple of years and move on to someone else. He wants to know you forever. So what does it have to do with suffering? Why do I need to be ready to suffer if we're talking about Jesus' desire for love and connection? Well, because suffering is part of really great relationships. Without suffering, there's not enough commitment or strength for the relationship to produce something that's truly awesome, to be something that's truly awesome. The suffering that people who are in a mutual relationship endures is part of the process of becoming something that ends in a much higher quality together than where they initially started. If you're committed to your family, you're going to suffer together as parents. If you're committed to your work and desire a high quality product, you're going to suffer together as a workplace to make that happen. Suffering is part of an awesome relationship. It doesn't mean people don't like each other. It just means that none of us are perfect and we can't see the end all the time. We can't predict the future. We have no idea what's coming ahead of us until we get there. Suffering is just part of us. You know, pain is sometimes just weakness leaving the body, says people in the gym occasionally. That's kind of like suffering. Suffering is part of the process that we must endure in order for the relationships we have with us to continue to grow. As we grow together, we suffer together. And suffering then, whatever that happens to be for you, self-sacrifice, enduring long, late nights, whatever that is for you, it's part of an awesome relationship. Here's a second thing I want to say around suffering. When is suffering a healthy thing for us to do? Suffering is necessary to reach a worthy vision. The text says, "For if you have suffered physically for Christ, you have finished with sin. You won't spend the rest of your lives chasing your own desires, but you will be anxious to do the will of God." I did a lot of group work in my grad degree, and marks varied between group to group. There were 2 times that I was in groups and we scored 100% on our final project. That was with groups of people that got along just fine. We all kind of knew each other, we're all kind of friends, but we were committed to suffering alongside each other for the greater good. And the purpose of our suffering was to get that best possible mark. Both times we were part of groups that scored 100%. It included a few all-nighters, at least a few all-nighters, anxiety around deadlines, lots of revisions, lots of checking in. I'm going to call that kind of experience suffering. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't happy. It was self-sacrifice. It was fretting. It was long nights. It was a lot of work. It was suffering to some degree. Now, here's what mature people get. To reach a vision that's worth reaching, suffering is required. It's part of the process to becoming great. And I say that to illustrate what the text is trying to tell us, this life lesson that the text is trying to teach us around suffering. So more than persecution, and I'm throwing this word persecution in because the original readers were truly being persecuted, okay? But more than persecution, suffering is a result of also simply not sinning. Not sinning means that we're rejecting the behaviors that hurt our connection with Jesus. Not sinning comes with the consequence of ending friendships that might not be good for us, of being ridiculed, of losing benefits that we actually want to have. There are things that we can do to hurt our connection with God. He loves us, but he doesn't want to put up with all manners of behavior and still keep calling us children and friends. Our behaviors reflect our choice to be connected with him. So the text tells us that one of the signs that we're on track is actually the presence of suffering. If we're suffering for our choice to follow Jesus because of the consequence of persecution, or because the consequence that we've just decided that we're going to reject sinning, we're going to reject doing things that hurt our connection with God, then suffering is actually healthy. And it is desirable because the lack of suffering means that we're drifting away from our relationship with God. The result of the presence of suffering, the kind that's the consequence of being a Jesus follower and how we choose to live well, is this. We minimize the amount of energy we put into a lifestyle that will end up hurting us, and we maximize the amount of energy we put into a lifestyle that connects us with God, which will also lead to all of eternity, maximum benefit. Suffering is a part of what it means to be a Jesus follower. God's got a great vision for us. He's got a great vision for you, to be together with him for all of eternity. There's a cost to reach that vision. It's not easy. Suffering is going to be a part of the process that changes us from what we are now to what we're going to be forever with Him. Every good vision requires sacrifice and hard work and discipline and dark moments, aka suffering. Here's my takeaway, my point of application that I discerned as I was reading this text. The goal of my life, my application, remember, the goal of my life can't be happiness. If my goal is happiness, I'm not going to get what's most fulfilling for me. A life that's most fulfilling is a life that includes the pain of working toward a greater purpose, whether that's the personal vision I have for my own life or God's vision of humanity being connected with Jesus forever. The best things in life come with a price. The pursuit of happiness as a life goal is personally diminishing for me. It's not going to get me where I want to go. Also, I want to make sure that I'm in alignment with God's goal of an eternal connection with Him. So I think that means that consistent self-reflection of my choices to ensure that my behavior reflects my choice to be part of a reciprocal relationship with God, where He loves me and I love Him. I think that needs to be ongoing for me. I need to have a mindset that's prepared to suffer for my highest value. And what is my highest value? It's God as the sustainer of my life for all eternity. Faith in Jesus is everything. It's worth suffering because the vision and the relationship matters. I'd love to hear what you came up with as your application for these two verses. We're meeting this Sunday. Come armed with your application. I'd love to hear it. That's it from me to you for now. Would you please like? Would you please share? Would you please subscribe? Would you please also ask for the link? We're meeting this Sunday in the morning, 10:30, in the evening, 6 o'clock, and also in person at Beaton Community Center at 3 o'clock p.m. If you'd like to contribute, you can find the link to do so down in the show notes for community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. See you next time.